February 9th, 1945, 0417 hours, 120 feet beneath Norwegian waters. HMS Venturer. Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Launders stood in the cramped control room of his British submarine, headphones pressed tight against his ears, listening to sounds that shouldn't exist. Through the hydrophones, underwater microphones that converted ocean sounds into electrical signals, he heard the unmistakable rhythmic thrum of diesel engines. Not British engines, not American engines, German engines, from a U-boat running submerged on electric motors, but with enough machinery vibration to create an acoustic signature. But that wasn't what made this moment extraordinary. What made Launders' hands tremble slightly as he gripped the periscope housing was this. Both submarines were completely underwater. No periscope depth operations. No surface running. Two submarines, both submerged, hunting each other in three-dimensional darkness. In the entire history of naval warfare, no submarine had ever sunk another submarine while both were submerged. It was considered impossible. Submarines hunted surface ships. Aircraft and destroyers hunted submarines. But submarines hunting submarines underwater? The technology didn't exist. The tactics had never been developed. The mathematics were too complex. Launders was about to prove everyone wrong. Within the next 11 minutes, HMS Venturer would fire 4 torpedoes at a target they couldn't see, based on calculations of a three-dimensional intercept course that Launders was computing in his head. The target, U-864, was carrying a cargo so secret that its loss would change the course of the Pacific War. And the commander of that U-boat had no idea he was being hunted by a predator, operating in a domain where hunting wasn't supposed to be possible. This is the story of the only confirmed submarine versus submarine engagement in history where both vessels were submerged. It's a story of mathematical brilliance, technological innovation, acoustic hunting, and the collision of two professional warriors who never saw each other, but whose decisions would echo through naval warfare forever. The impossible hunt had begun. To understand why Launders' achievement was revolutionary, you must first understand the fundamental problem of submarine warfare in 1945. Submarines were designed to be invisible. Their entire tactical advantage depended on stealth. They operated on the principle of see without being seen, using periscopes to observe surface targets while remaining hidden beneath the waves. When surfaced, submarines were vulnerable, slow, poorly armed, easily spotted. Their power came from invisibility beneath the water. Once submerged, they became ghosts, detectable only through specialized equipment, and even then, only under specific conditions. By 1945, anti-submarine warfare had developed 3 primary detection methods. 1. Visual detection, the oldest and most reliable. Aircraft spotting surface submarines, surface ships, seeing periscopes or wake disturbances, required the submarine to be at or near the surface, useless against deep-diving submarines. 2. Radar. Introduced in World War II, radar could detect surface submarines at night or in poor visibility when visual detection failed. Centimetric radar could even detect a submarine's periscope or snorkel mast, but radar waves don't penetrate water. A submarine 20 feet below the surface was invisible to radar. 3. Sonar ASDIC, the revolutionary technology. Sonar, sound navigation and ranging, used sound waves to detect underwater objects. Active sonar sent out a ping, a sound pulse, and listened for echoes bouncing back from solid objects. Passive sonar simply listened for sounds created by the target itself. Engine noise, propeller cavitation, machinery vibration. Active sonar was precise but had a fatal flaw. It announced your presence. Every ping broadcast your location to anyone listening. For a submarine, using active sonar was like shouting your position in a dark room where everyone has a gun. Passive sonar was stealthy. You just listened, but required the target to make noise. A submarine running silent on electric motors, with crew ordered to minimize movement, was nearly undetectable. Here's why submarine-on-submarine combat was considered impossible. Problem 1. Detection. Both submarines are trying to be invisible. Both are underwater. Visual detection, impossible. Radar, useless. Active sonar, suicide, reveals your position. Passive sonar, only works if the enemy makes noise. Problem 2, targeting. Even if you detect the enemy, how do you target them? Torpedoes in 1945 ran at fixed depths and straight courses. To hit a maneuvering submarine underwater, you need to know their exact position. Impossible without active sonar. Know their course. Impossible without sustained tracking. Know their speed. Impossible without multiple position fixes. Calculate a three-dimensional intercept course. Fire torpedoes with enough spread to account for uncertainty. Do all this without the target detecting you first. Problem 3, mathematics. Surface ship torpedo attacks were difficult enough. You're calculating an intercept course in 2 dimensions, surface of the ocean. But submarine versus submarine combat added a 3rd dimension, depth. Your target can dive, surface, turn in any direction. Your torpedoes run at fixed depths. You're firing blind at a target that might be anywhere in a volume of ocean measured in cubic miles. And that target is probably maneuvering to evade hunters it knows are out there. The mathematics were considered unsolvable without computers. And in 1945, computers were room-sized machines that couldn't fit on submarines. By February 1945, there had been thousands of submarine patrols in World War II. Hundreds of submarines sunk by aircraft, destroyers, mines. Submarines had sunk thousands of merchant ships and hundreds of warships. But submarines sinking other submarines? It had happened, but always with at least one submarine on the surface. U-boats sinking Allied submarines they encountered surfaced. Allied submarines sinking U-boats caught running on the surface. One submarine ramming another in surface engagements. 0 confirmed. Kills with both submarines submerged. The Royal Navy's submarine service had trained for this scenario, theoretically, but considered it so unlikely that most commanders thought they'd never face it. The tactical manual for submarine versus submarine combat was 2 pages long and essentially said, "Don't try it. Surface and use your deck gun." Lieutenant James Launders had read that manual. He was about to throw it away and write a new one. James Stewart Seton Launders was 32 years old in February 1945, a career Royal Navy officer who had joined the submarine service before the war. He was not a typical submarine commander. Most submarine captains were aggressive hunters, eager for kills, competitive about tonnage sunk. Launders was different. He was a mathematician, an acoustic specialist, a man who thought in 3 dimensions and saw patterns in chaos. Before the war, he had studied at the Royal Naval College, Greenwich, specializing in navigation and fire control, the science of calculating where to aim weapons to hit moving targets. He had a gift for mental calculation, the ability to process multiple variables simultaneously and arrive at solutions while others were still defining the problem. His fellow officers called him the Professor because he carried a notebook everywhere, filling it with equations, diagrams, acoustic signatures. He had spent months analyzing hydrophone recordings, learning to identify different submarine types by their sound signatures, the distinctive pitch of diesel engines, the cavitation patterns of different propeller designs, the mechanical rhythms of various auxiliary machinery. Launders commanded HMS Venturer, a British V-class submarine commissioned in 1943. She was not the newest, not the largest, not the most heavily armed submarine in the Royal Navy, but she had advantages that mattered for this hunt. Specifications: length, 204 feet. Displacement, 670 tons surfaced, 740 submerged. Speed, 11.25 knots surfaced, 9 knots submerged. Range, 4,500 nautical miles. Armament, 4 21-inch torpedo tubes bow, 2 21-inch tubes stern. Torpedoes, 12 Mark 8 torpedoes. Crew, 37 officers and men. Venturer's most important feature wasn't her torpedoes or her speed. It was her acoustic equipment, and the crew trained to use it. She carried Type 129 ASDIC, the British term for sonar, standard equipment. But more importantly, she had been fitted with improved passive hydrophones and had a sonar operator, Petty Officer Arthur Westcott, who was among the best in the Royal Navy. Westcott could identify submarine types by engine sounds alone. He could estimate range by sound intensity. He could detect course changes by shifts in Doppler effect, the change in sound frequency caused by relative motion, the same effect that makes a train whistle change pitch as it passes. Together, Launders and Westcott had developed an unorthodox hunting technique, using passive sonar to track targets for extended periods, building a picture of their behavior, then calculating intercept courses based on pattern analysis rather than active sonar fixes. It was slow. It was painstaking. It required patience that most submarine commanders lacked, but it worked. In January 1945, British intelligence had intercepted German communications, indicating that U-864 would transit from Bergen, Norway, to the Far East, carrying a cargo designated highly secret material. What U-864 actually carried would not be fully known until after the war, when captured German documents revealed the truth. The submarine was transporting Me-262 jet fighter components and blueprints, V-2 rocket guidance systems, 2 German jet engine specialists, advanced optical equipment, 67 tons of mercury for weapons production, technical documents for German wonder weapons. The cargo was destined for Japan. If it arrived, it could significantly advance Japanese military technology. Germany was collapsing, but Japan was still fighting. The cargo had to be stopped. HMS Venturer was assigned to patrol the Norwegian coast near Bergen and intercept U-864 during its transit. Intelligence provided approximate departure dates, but no specific route, speed, or depth. Launders would have to find the U-boat in the vastness of the Norwegian Sea, identify it among other submarine traffic, and sink it. The orders were explicit. U-864 must not reach Japan. For 3 days, Venturer patrolled the suspected transit route in terrible weather. North Atlantic winter, freezing temperatures, heavy seas, near constant darkness. The submarine rolled in the swells even at depth. Crew members were seasick. Conditions were miserable. Launders kept Venturer submerged most of the time, running on electric motors, moving slowly to minimize noise, listening. Westcott sat at the hydrophone station hour after hour, headphones on, listening to the ocean's symphony, the roar of waves, the clicks and whistles of marine life, the distant rumble of merchant ship propellers, the howl of storms transmitted through the water. He was listening for one specific sound, the acoustic signature of a German Type 9 U-boat. On February 9th at 3:47 hours, he heard it. Captain, possible submarine contact, bearing 270, range indeterminate, diesel signature. Launders was at the hydrophone station in seconds. Westcott handed him the headphones. Launders listened, his brain processing the acoustic information automatically. Rhythm, diesel engine, running slowly. Not a surface ship, too quiet for that. A submarine. Running on diesels while submerged, that meant they were snorkeling, using a breathing tube to run diesel engines while remaining submerged, a late-war German innovation. Frequency analysis. The pitch matched German MAN diesel engines, used on Type 9 U-boats. Bearing. Contact was west of Venturer's position, moving south? The bearing was changing slowly but steadily. Target was on a course that would take it down the Norwegian coast. This was it, U-864. But Launders faced an immediate problem. The contact was intermittent. U-864 was snorkeling, but not continuously. The submarine would run on diesels for a period, then secure the snorkel and run silent on electric motors. When silent, the contact would disappear from passive sonar. Tracking a target that kept vanishing would be nearly impossible, unless... Launders pulled out his notebook and began calculating. The commander of U-864 was Korvettenkapitän Ralph Reimar Wolfram, 35 years old, a veteran of the Battle of the Atlantic with 11 patrols behind him. He was professional, cautious, competent, exactly the kind of officer you'd trust with a mission-critical cargo. Wolfram knew the odds. By February 1945, U-boat survival rates were catastrophic. Allied air superiority was total. Radar-equipped aircraft could detect submarines on the surface from miles away. The Bay of Biscay was a graveyard for U-boats. The North Atlantic was patrolled constantly. His mission, transit from Bergen, Norway to the Far East via a route around the North Cape, then south through the Indian Ocean to Penang, Malaysia, was essentially a suicide run. The journey would take months. The chances of arriving were low, but the cargo was vital. Germany was losing the war in Europe, but if Japan could continue fighting with access to German jet technology and advanced weapons systems, perhaps the Allies would negotiate rather than demand unconditional surrender. It was a desperate gamble, but Germany, in February 1945, had only desperate gambits left. U-864, specifications. U-864 was a Type 9D2 U-boat, one of the larger German submarine designs. Length, 292 feet. Displacement, 1,610 tons. Surfaced, 1,799, submerged. Speed, 19.2 knots surfaced, 6.9 knots submerged. Range, 31,500 nautical miles at 10 knots, surfaced. Armament, 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, 4 bow, 2 stern, 137 mm AA gun, 120 mm AA gun. Torpedoes, 24 torpedoes total. Crew, 57 officers and men. Special cargo, 67 tons of mercury and steel flasks, plus technical equipment and specialists. The submarine was larger than Venturer, had more range, carried more torpedoes, but size was a disadvantage in this fight. Larger submarines were noisier. They had more machinery, more moving parts, more sources of acoustic signature. U-864 had been fitted with a snorkel, a German innovation allowing submarines to run diesel engines while submerged by extending a breathing tube above the surface. This let them recharge batteries without fully surfacing, reducing vulnerability to air attack. But the snorkel had problems. Problem 1. Noise. Running diesel engines created significant acoustic signature. A submarine on electric motors was quiet. A submarine snorkeling sounded like a diesel truck underwater. Passive sonar could detect it from miles away. Problem 2. Depth limitation. The snorkel could only extend so far, about 30 to 40 feet above the submarine's hull. This meant snorkeling submarines had to remain relatively shallow, typically at periscope depth, 60 to 80 feet, making them more vulnerable to detection. Problem 3. Valve closures. The snorkel head valve automatically closed when waves washed over it, preventing seawater from flooding down the tube. But when the valve closed, the diesel engines would suck air from inside the submarine, creating a partial vacuum that was agonizingly painful for the crew. Ears would pop, noses would bleed, men would gasp for air until the valve reopened. Wolfram hated the snorkel, but he had no choice. His mission required staying submerged as much as possible. Allied air patrols were too intense to risk surface running. February 9th, 0400 hours. U-864 was proceeding south along the Norwegian coast at 80 feet depth, using the snorkel to run diesels and recharge batteries. Wolfram planned to snorkel for 2 more hours, then secure the mast and run deep on electric motors during daylight, minimizing the already small chance of detection. He had no idea HMS Venturer was 4 miles to his east, listening to every diesel pulse through passive hydrophones. The hunted didn't know he was being hunted. From 3:47 to 6:30, Lieutenant Launders conducted one of the most remarkable tracking operations in submarine warfare history. The problem was this. U-864 would snorkel for 30 to 40 minutes, creating acoustic signature Venturer could track. Then U-864 would secure the snorkel and run silent on electric motors, disappearing from passive sonar. During silent periods, Venturer had to predict where U-864 would be when it next made noise. Launders treated it like a three-dimensional geometry problem. First, he established a pattern. U-864 snorkeled for 30 to 40 minutes, then ran silent for 15 to 20 minutes, then snorkeled again. During snorkel periods, course approximately 170 degrees, south-southwest, speed 5 to 6 knots, depth 80 feet. During silent periods, maintaining course but slower, perhaps 3 to 4 knots. Second, he predicted positions. When U-864 went silent, Launders would plot the last known position, assume constant course and a reduced speed, and predict where the submarine would be when it next snorkeled. Then Venturer would move to a position where, when U-864 started making noise again, Venturer would be in optimal tracking range. The calculation: if U-864 is at position A when it goes silent, traveling at bearing 170 at 3.5 knots, then in 18 minutes it will be at position B. I need to move Venturer to position C, which is 2 miles from position B, at bearing 090, so that when U-864 starts snorkeling again, I'll be at ideal listening range without being detected. Launders did these calculations in his head, updating constantly as new acoustic data came in. Petty Officer Westcott, listening on hydrophones, would call out bearing changes. Launders would refine his mental model of U-864's movements. The navigator would plot positions on the chart. The entire dance was conducted in near silence, with Venturer creeping through the dark water at 3 to 4 knots, barely making steerage way. Hour 1, 0400 to 0500. Contact established. U-864 clearly identified by acoustic signature. Launders begins building behavioral model. U-864 is proceeding south, using snorkel intermittently. No indication they've detected Venturer. Venturer maintains position roughly 4 miles east of U-864, paralleling their course. Hour 2, 0500 to 0600. Pattern confirmed. Launders now confident he can predict U-864's silent running periods. He briefs his officers. We're going to track them until they're in open water, away from coastal traffic. Then we'll position for an attack. We have one chance. We won't get active sonar, so we're shooting blind based on acoustic tracking. I'll need absolute silence during the attack run. The crew understood. They'd trained for this scenario theoretically. Now it was real. Hour 3, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. U-864 changes behavior. Longer silent periods. Wolfram is being cautious, perhaps suspecting surface ships or aircraft in the area. This complicates tracking, but also creates an opportunity. During longer silent periods, U-864 covers more ground, potentially moving into better attack geometry. Launders waits. Patience is his weapon. The decision point, 0700. At 0700, U-864 makes another snorkel run. Launders now has enough data. He's tracked the U-boat for 3 hours. He knows their pattern, course, speed, depth. He's built a complete behavioral profile, and U-864 has moved into open water, away from shipping lanes, away from potential neutral observers. Time to attack. But there's a problem. Launders faced a problem no submarine commander in history had solved. How do you hit a submerged submarine you can't see? Using torpedoes that run at fixed depths in straight courses, when your target is maneuvering in 3 dimensions. The variables. U-864's position. Known only approximately, based on acoustic bearing and estimated range from sound intensity. Westcott estimated range at 3,000 to 4,000 yards, but this was educated guesswork. Error margin, plus or minus 500 yards. U-864's course, tracked at approximately 170 degrees based on bearing changes over time. But course could change at any moment. The target didn't know it was being hunted, so it wasn't actively evading. But submarines on transit naturally make course corrections. U-864's speed, estimated at 5 knots during snorkel periods, 3 to 4 knots when silent, calculated from rate of bearing change and estimated range. Error margin, plus or minus 1 knot. U-864's depth, approximately 80 feet during snorkel operations, required for snorkel mast to function. Unknown when silent, could be anywhere from 60 to 200 feet. Torpedo specifications. Type, Mark 8 torpedoes, British standard. Speed, 45.5 knots, fast setting. Range, 5,000 yards at fast setting, 14,000 yards at slow setting. Depth setting, adjustable before firing, but runs at constant depth once launched. Guidance, none. Straight running, unguided torpedoes. The problem. Launders had to fire torpedoes from Venturer's current position at where U-864 would be when the torpedoes arrived, accounting for 1. Time of torpedo flight, distance divided by torpedo speed. 2. U-864's movement during torpedo flight, speed times time. 3. U-864's potential course changes. 4. Depth uncertainty. 5. Range uncertainty. And he had to do all this without active sonar, which would reveal Venturer's position and cause U-864 to take evasive action. The solution. Launders pulled out his notebook and began writing equations. The fundamental problem was a three-dimensional intercept calculation. He needed to determine point of aim, POA, where to aim the torpedoes so they intersect U-864's projected path. The calculation. Let VT equals torpedo speed equals 45.5 knots. VU equals U-boat speed equals estimated 5 knots. R equals range to target equals estimated 3,500 yards. Theta equals angle between Venturer's heading and bearing to U-864. CU equals U-boat course equals 170 degrees. CV equals Venturer's course. Time for torpedo to reach target area. Initial estimate. T equals R divided by VT equals 3,500 yards divided by 45.5 knots, approximately 2.5 minutes. Distance. U-864 will travel in 2.5 minutes. D equals VU times T equals 5 knots times 2.5 minutes, approximately 375 yards. Point of aim must lead the target by 375 yards along course 170 degrees. But this assumed perfect knowledge of all variables, which Launders didn't have. The spread. To account for uncertainty, Launders decided to fire not one torpedo, but a spread of 4, with different aim points. Torpedo 1, aimed at U-864's current estimated position, based on acoustic bearing. Depth setting, 80 feet. This torpedo would hit if U-864 suddenly stopped or reversed course. Torpedo 2, aimed 200 yards ahead of estimated position, along course 170 degrees. Depth, 80 feet. This would hit if U-864 maintained current course and speed. Torpedo 3, aimed 400 yards ahead of estimated position, along course 170 degrees. Depth, 80 feet. This covered the possibility that U-864 was moving faster than estimated. Torpedo 4, aimed 300 yards ahead, depth 60 feet. This covered the possibility that U-864 had surfaced slightly from snorkel depth. The torpedoes would be fired in sequence, 17.5 seconds apart, creating a spread pattern in both time and space. The risk. Once the first torpedo was fired, U-864 would hear it. The sound of torpedo propellers was distinctive. Wolfram would know he was under attack. At that point, U-864 would take evasive action. Emergency deep dive, hard turn, increased speed, all of the above. The remaining 3 torpedoes had to be fired quickly, before U-864 could complete evasive maneuvers. Launders would have perhaps 60 seconds from first torpedo launch to fire all 4. After that, U-864 would be evading, and the calculated intercept points would be worthless. The maneuver. To get into firing position, Venturer had to 1. Close to optimal range, 2,500 to 3,000 yards for best accuracy. 2. Position perpendicular to U-864's track. Optimizes hit probability. 3. Maintain depth control precisely. Torpedoes must be level when fired. 4. Remain undetected until firing. Launders plotted an intercept course. Venturer would increase speed to 6 knots, move to a position ahead and to the side of U-864's track, then slow and wait for the target to approach the kill zone. 0715 hours. Helm, come to course 140, increase speed to 6 knots. Venturer turned and accelerated. The noise of their own movement made acoustic tracking difficult, but Launders was betting that U-864 would maintain course. 0728 hours. All stop. Rig for silent running. Torpedo room. Prepare all tubes for firing. Venturer coasted to a stop. Position perpendicular to U-864's estimated track. Range, approximately 2,800 yards. Now they waited. 0747 hours. Captain, contact bearing 175, strengthening. Target is snorkeling again. Perfect. U-864 had emerged from silent running exactly where Launders predicted. The behavioral model was accurate. Range? Estimate 3,000 yards, sir, based on signal strength. Launders did rapid mental calculations. U-864 at 3,000 yards, course 170, speed 5 knots. Torpedo runtime approximately 2.25 minutes at 45.5 knots. Target will travel approximately 340 yards during torpedo flight. Adjust aim points accordingly. Torpedo room, set depth, 80 feet on tubes 1, 2, and 3. Set depth 60 feet on tube 4, spread as calculated. The torpedo crew confirmed settings. Each torpedo's depth mechanism was set by hand, using a wrench to adjust a mechanical depth-keeping mechanism. Get the depth wrong, and the torpedo would run under or over the target. 0752 hours. Target bearing 173, range closing. Estimate 2,800 yards. Stand by all tubes. Launders checked his calculations one final time. The geometry was good. U-864 was on the predicted course at the predicted speed. If he fired now, and if U-864 maintained course for the next 2+ minutes, at least one torpedo should hit. But the moment he fired, U-864 would hear the torpedoes and maneuver. Everything depended on firing all 4 torpedoes before Wolfram could react. Fire 1. 8:12 hours. A hiss of compressed air, a lurch as the first torpedo left the tube. The submarine's trim shifted slightly from the weight loss. In the water ahead of Venturer, a Mark 8 torpedo began its run, 21 inches in diameter, 21 feet long, carrying a 750-pound TNT warhead, propeller-driven at 45.5 knots, running at 80 feet depth on a course calculated to intercept a submarine 2,800 yards away. 17 seconds. Fire 2. Another hiss. Another torpedo away. 17 seconds. Fire 3. Third torpedo running. 17 seconds. Fire 4. Fourth torpedo fired. 4 torpedoes in the water, spread across a 500-yard zone, running at depths of 60 and 80 feet, all aimed at a target they couldn't see, based on acoustic tracking and mathematical prediction. Launders pulled his stopwatch from his pocket and clicked it. Time to impact, 135 seconds, aboard U-864. At 0813, Wolfram was in the control room, monitoring the snorkel operation. They'd been submerged for 5 days, cautiously making their way down the Norwegian coast. So far, no signs of enemy activity. The journey was going better than expected. The hydrophone operator's voice cut through the machinery noise. Torpedo in the water, bearing 090, high-speed propeller, range close. Wolfram's stomach dropped. Torpedo? From where? They hadn't detected any surface ships, no aircraft overhead. Where was the attack coming from? Emergency deep, ahead flank, hard left rudder. U-864's crew exploded into action. The diving planes were put to full dive. The electric motors surged to maximum power. The submarine heeled over into a hard turn, angling downward. But Wolfram had made a fatal error. He assumed the torpedo was coming from a surface ship or a submarine at periscope depth, firing at U-864's snorkel mast. Standard procedure was emergency deep dive. Get below the torpedo's running depth as fast as possible. But Launders had set his torpedoes to run at 60 and 80 feet, deeper than normal anti-submarine torpedoes, which typically ran at 20 to 40 feet for periscope depth targets. By diving, Wolfram was diving into the torpedo paths, not away from them. 08-13-45. First torpedo passes. The first torpedo, aimed at U-864's starting position, ran through empty water where the U-boat had been before beginning evasive maneuvers. Miss. 8-14-03. Second torpedo. The second torpedo, aimed 200 yards ahead, was on a collision course with where U-864 would have been if it had maintained course and speed. But U-864 was turning and diving. The torpedo passed 50 yards astern, close enough that U-864's hydrophone operator could hear its propeller scream past. Torpedo passed astern. 08-14-21. Third torpedo. The third torpedo, aimed 400 yards ahead, was tracking toward a point in space that U-864's turn was carrying it away from, but not fast enough. U-864's diving turn was bringing it down through 75 feet depth, accelerating toward 80 feet, exactly where the third torpedo was running. The torpedo's magnetic influence fuse detected the large mass of metal passing nearby. It detonated. 8-14-22. Detonation. 750 pounds of TNT exploded in the water, approximately 15 yards from U-864's starboard side, amidships. The explosion wasn't a direct hit, but it didn't need to be. The underwater shockwave, a pressure pulse transmitted through water with devastating efficiency, slammed into U-864's pressure hull. Steel plates buckled, welds cracked, rivets sheared. In the confined spaces inside the submarine, men were thrown against bulkheads. Lights shattered, electrical systems sparked and failed, machinery torn from mountings. The pressure hull maintained integrity, barely, but the damage was catastrophic. 8-14-38. Fourth torpedo. The fourth torpedo, running at 60 feet, hit the already crippled submarine directly. This time, the warhead struck the pressure hull near the forward torpedo room. 750 pounds of TNT exploded against the steel hull. The explosion tore through the pressure hull like a cutting torch through paper. A massive hole opened in the submarine's side. The North Atlantic, at a pressure of 50 pounds per square inch, roared into the hull. In the forward torpedo room, 4 men died instantly, crushed by the inrush of water or killed by the explosion itself. The compartment flooded in seconds. Watertight doors slammed shut, some automatically, some by crew members who sealed themselves in compartments they knew were flooding, sacrificing themselves to save shipmates. But it was too late. The damage was too severe, the flooding too catastrophic. U-864 plunged toward the bottom, out of control, sinking through 100 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet. At approximately 500 feet, the pressure hull collapsed. The remaining air-filled compartments imploded under the crushing pressure. 57 men died, including Korvettenkaptein Wolfram, the jet engine specialists, and the entire crew. U-864 struck the seabed at approximately 150 meters depth and broke apart, scattering its cargo of mercury and secret technology across the ocean floor. Aboard Venturer. "Detonation, sir. Hit!" The crew heard the underwater explosion transmitted through the water. Then, seconds later, a second explosion, larger, deeper toned. "Breaking up noises, sir. Sounds like bulkheads collapsing." Then, silence. Launders kept Venturer silent for 10 minutes, listening. No sounds of survivors, no sound of a crippled submarine attempting to surface. Just the ocean's background noise. U-864 was gone. Launders picked up the ship's log and wrote, 08-14 hours, fired 4 torpedoes at submerged U-boat, heard 2 detonations followed by breaking up noises. Assessed target, destroyed, returning to patrol station. He closed the log and looked at his crew, exhausted, relieved, stunned by what they'd just accomplished. "Well done, gentlemen. Make preparations to surface. We'll report the engagement by radio." The impossible had become possible. HMS Venturer surfaced at 0930 hours and sent an encrypted message to Royal Navy Submarine Command. "Engaged and destroyed, submerged U-boat, position 60 degrees north, 4 degrees west, both vessels submerged. Request confirmation of kill." The response came hours later. "Confirm nature of engagement. Clarify, both vessels submerged." Launders responded with detailed account. The Navy's reaction was skepticism. Submerged versus submerged engagement? Impossible. Launders must have attacked a surfaced or snorkeling U-boat and misinterpreted the engagement. But Launders had witnesses, his entire crew, and he had the acoustic logs, showing U-864 fully submerged throughout the engagement. After Germany's surrender, captured German naval records confirmed U-864's loss on February 9, 1945. The position matched, the timing matched. No other Allied forces had been in the area. Interrogation of German submarine personnel revealed that U-864 had departed Bergen on February 5, carrying a secret cargo to Japan. The cargo manifest recovered from German archives confirmed jet engine components, rocket technology, mercury, specialists. Most importantly, German records showed U-864 had been fully submerged when lost, confirming Launders' account. The Royal Navy officially credited HMS Venturer with the only confirmed submarine versus submarine kill in history, where both vessels were fully submerged. Lieutenant James Launders was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, DSO, for the engagement. The citation read, "For outstanding skill and determination in tracking and destroying an enemy submarine, while both vessels were submerged, demonstrating tactical innovation and calculation of the highest order." But the details remained classified. The techniques Launders had developed were too valuable to reveal. The citation mentioned tactical innovation, but didn't specify what that innovation was. Launders remained in the Royal Navy, eventually achieving the rank of commander. He taught submarine tactics at the Royal Navy Submarine School, where his engagement became a classified case study in acoustic hunting and fire control. He rarely spoke publicly about the engagement. When asked, he would say only, "We were lucky. The mathematics worked out." But his students knew better. It wasn't luck, it was brilliance. Launders retired in 1965 and died in 1982 at age 69. His obituary in the Times mentioned his naval career, but made only passing reference to distinguished service in submarine operations. In 2003, Norwegian authorities located the wreck of U-864 at a depth of 150 meters, 2 nautical miles off Fedje, Norway, exactly where Launders had reported the engagement. Surveys revealed the submarine had broken into several sections. The cargo of 67 tons of mercury had spilled from ruptured containers, creating an environmental hazard that persists today. The Norwegian government has debated raising the wreck to recover the mercury, but the cost and technical challenges are immense. As of 2025, U-864 remains on the seafloor, a tomb for 57 German submariners, and a monument to the most extraordinary submarine engagement in history. Analysis of the cargo manifest revealed that if U-864 had reached Japan, it could have significantly impacted the Pacific War. The Me-262 jet engine technology could have accelerated Japanese jet fighter development by 12 to 18 months. The V-2 guidance systems could have improved Japanese missile programs. The mercury was essential for weapons production, particularly for detonators and switches. But all of it ended up scattered across the Norwegian seafloor instead, sunk by a commander who calculated intercept courses in his head and fired blind at a target he couldn't see. What Launders accomplished on February 9, 1945, represented a quantum leap in submarine warfare. Before Venturer versus U-864, submarine versus submarine combat, theoretical, considered impractical. Passive sonar tracking, used for detection, not fire control. Submerged attacks on submerged targets, impossible. After Venturer versus U-864, proven that acoustic tracking could support fire control. Demonstrated three-dimensional intercept calculations were practical. Established that patience and pattern analysis could overcome technological limitations. Today's submarines use technology Launders could barely imagine. Computerized fire control systems that solved the same three-dimensional intercept problems Launders calculated by hand, but in milliseconds. Guided torpedoes that actively home on targets using their own sonar. Digital sonar arrays with processing power to track multiple targets simultaneously. Periscope-free operations using photonics masts and thermal imaging. But the fundamental principle remains: acoustic tracking, pattern analysis, prediction of enemy behavior based on limited data. Launders pioneered these techniques with 1945 technology. Modern submarine commanders use the same concepts, just with better tools. The Venturer versus U-864 engagement is taught at every major submarine warfare school. U.S. Navy Submarine School, New London. Royal Navy Submarine School, Faslane. French Navy Submarine Training Facilities. All NATO submarine forces. The case study focuses on acoustic signature analysis, passive tracking techniques, fire control calculations for maneuvering targets, command decision-making under uncertainty, the value of patience in tactical situations. While the destruction of U-864's cargo didn't decisively change the Pacific War, Japan surrendered 5 months later, it represented a broader strategic success, the complete Allied dominance of the underwater domain. By February 1945, U-boats were being sunk faster than Germany could build them. The Atlantic was no longer contested. Submarines couldn't transit safely even in European coastal waters. Launders' engagement demonstrated that even German submarines operating with the latest technology, schnorkels, carrying vital cargo, commanded by experienced officers, couldn't escape Allied anti-submarine capabilities. The psychological impact on German submarine crews who learned of U-864's fate was significant. If you could be hunted and killed while submerged by another submarine you never detected, then nowhere was safe. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the engagement was the human performance under pressure. Lieutenant Launders tracked a target for 3 hours, calculated complex three-dimensional intercepts in his head, made the decision to fire blind, and executed perfectly. Petty Officer Westcott maintained acoustic contact on a target that kept disappearing, provided accurate bearing data throughout the engagement, never lost focus during 3 hours of intense concentration. Venturer's crew maintained absolute silence for hours, executed orders flawlessly during the attack, remained disciplined during the agonizing wait for torpedo impacts. No computers, no automated systems, just trained professionals doing extremely difficult work under terrible conditions. Perfectly, U-864 was carrying technology meant to help Japan fight more effectively. Jet engines, rockets, advanced weapons. But the submarine was sunk by something far simpler: mathematics, patience, and a commander who understood that in warfare, thinking often beats technology. The most advanced cargo ever carried on a U-boat was defeated by acoustic analysis and mental arithmetic. Technology matters, but thinking matters more. February 9th, 1945, 0814 hours, Norwegian Sea. 2 submarines met in darkness, 120 feet beneath a winter ocean. One carried secret technology meant to change the course of a war. Jet engines, rockets, mercury. Specialists. It was larger, newer, carried more torpedoes. Its commander was experienced, cautious, professional. The other carried something more valuable: a commander who could think in 3 dimensions, a crew trained to listen, and the patience to track a ghost through black water for 3 hours before pulling the trigger. When it was over, 57 men were dead. 67 tons of mercury littered the seafloor, and the future of submarine warfare had changed forever. Lieutenant James Launders had proven that the impossible was merely difficult, that submarines could hunt submarines, that acoustic tracking could support fire control, that mathematics could defeat steel. HMS Venturer surfaced into gray Norwegian daylight and sent a simple message. Target destroyed, both vessels submerged. That message rewrote naval warfare doctrine. Every submarine force in the world studied what Launders had done. Tactics changed, training changed, technology development changed. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. Its impact lasted decades. Today, U-864 rests on the Norwegian seafloor, hull broken, secrets scattered, mercury leaching into sediments, an environmental hazard and a war grave. HMS Venturer was scrapped in 1949, 4 years after her greatest triumph. Lieutenant Launders died in 1982, having rarely spoken of the engagement that made him legendary. But the lesson endures. In warfare, as in life, the greatest victories come not from superior weapons, but from superior thinking. Launders didn't have better torpedoes, better sonar, or better equipment than the Germans. He had better mathematics, better patience, better understanding of how to turn partial information into actionable intelligence. He had a notebook full of equations and the discipline to solve them under pressure. And on February 9, 1945, in the cold darkness beneath the Norwegian Sea, that was enough. The submarine that surfaced inside the enemy harbor was every U-boat commander's nightmare, a predator that hunted in the dark, struck without warning, and killed without being seen. Except the harbor wasn't a place, it was a domain, the underwater realm where submarines thought they were safe, and Launders proved that nowhere was safe anymore. The age of the submarine as an invulnerable hunter had ended. The age of the submarine as prey had begun.